Have you ever noticed that the strongest, most capable men are often the ones who quietly disappear from the lives of people who once meant everything to them? Not with anger, not with a dramatic exit, just silence, a slow fade, a door that closes so gently you almost don't hear it click shut. If you've ever done this, walked away from a friendship, a family member, a relationship without explanation, without a fight, just a clean and quiet severing, I want you to stay with me for the next few minutes, because what looks like coldness from the outside is almost never coldness at all. And today we're going to look underneath it together, slowly, honestly. Think about this for a moment. When a man cuts someone off, the world around him usually assumes the obvious story. They say he's heartless. They say he doesn't care. They say he's incapable of love or loyalty or connection. But if you have ever been that man, if you have ever felt your hand moving toward the block button, or found yourself rehearsing the words, "I just need space," until they became a wall instead of a sentence, you know that the real story is almost the opposite of what people assume. It is not the absence of feeling. It is the overwhelming presence of it. It is a nervous system that has been holding too much for too long with nowhere left to put it down. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't show up on your face. You can smile in photos, laugh at the right moments, show up to work, carry your responsibilities, and still be quietly drowning underneath all of it. This is the exhaustion of a man who has learned, somewhere along the way, that closeness comes with a cost he is no longer willing to pay. Maybe it was a father who used love as leverage. Maybe it was a friend who mistook vulnerability for weakness and used it against him the moment it was convenient. Maybe it was simply years of being needed by everyone for everything until his own needs became a language he forgot how to speak. And somewhere in that slow erosion, a decision was made, not consciously, not with words, but in the deep architecture of the nervous system. It is safer to be alone than to be hurt again. I want you to sit with that for a second because it matters. Cutting people off is rarely a rejection of love. It is more often a rejection of the pain that seems to always arrive disguised as love. And when the mind cannot tell the difference anymore, when connection and danger start to feel like the same sensation in the body, the most efficient solution the brain can find is distance. Not because distance heals anything, but because distance at least feels controllable. But there is something even deeper here, something most people never stop to examine. Human beings are not simply emotional creatures. We are prediction machines. Your brain is constantly trying to anticipate what will happen next based on everything that has happened before. If over and over again closeness has led to disappointment, betrayal, abandonment, or being taken for granted, then your brain begins to treat closeness itself as a threat, not the specific person, not even the specific relationship. Closeness, intimacy, vulnerability, all of it gets filed under the same warning label. This leads to pain. And once that pattern is set, it doesn't matter how kind the next person is, how patient, how genuinely good, the alarm still goes off. The walls still go up, not because the new person did anything wrong, but because the body remembers what the mind has tried to forget. This is why so many men who cut people off describe the same strange sensation afterward. Not relief, not peace, but a kind of hollow quiet. A silence that isn't calm, but empty. Because the truth is, distance was never actually the goal. Safety was the goal. And somewhere along the way, those two things got confused. You can be distant and still not be safe. You can be surrounded by silence and still be at war inside. Most people never realize this, that isolation and peace are not the same thing, even though they can look identical from the outside. Let me tell you about a man. We'll call him David, though this could be 1,000 different men with 1,000 different names. David was the kind of person everyone relied on. The friend who always answered the phone. The son who always showed up. The partner who gave everything quietly without asking for much in return. For years, he built his identity around being the steady one, the strong one, the one who didn't need anything. And for years it worked, until the day it didn't. Until the day his father made a passing comment that cut deeper than any of them realized it would. Until the day a friend he trusted shared something private that wasn't his to share. Until the accumulated weight of being everyone's rock and no one's priority became too heavy to carry silently anymore. David didn't yell. He didn't confront anyone. He simply stopped responding. Calls went unanswered. Messages sat there, delivered but not read, or read but not answered. Slowly, one by one, he closed the doors he had spent years holding open. And for a while it felt like strength. It felt like finally choosing himself. But then something strange started happening. The silence that was supposed to feel like freedom started to feel like a room with no windows. He had removed the people who hurt him, yes. But he had also, without meaning to, removed the possibility of being truly known by anyone at all. But what happened next changed everything. It wasn't a big moment. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no movie-perfect turning point. It was smaller than that, and somehow more powerful. One evening, sitting alone in an apartment that had grown quieter than he ever intended it to be, David asked himself a question he had been avoiding for years. Am I protecting myself, or am I punishing myself? And in that question, something cracked open. Because he realized that the walls he built to keep pain out had also slowly become a prison that kept him in. He wasn't safe. He was simply alone. And those two things had never actually been the same thing. He had just been too tired to see the difference. This is where life begins to change for David, and maybe for you too, if any part of this story feels familiar. It begins the moment you stop asking, how do I protect myself from ever being hurt again, and start asking, how do I become someone who can hold pain without being destroyed by it? Because here is a truth that most people spend years, sometimes decades, avoiding. You cannot build a meaningful life by eliminating every risk of pain. You can only build a meaningful life by developing the strength to endure pain without losing yourself in the process. Distance protects you from repeat injuries, yes, but it also guarantees that you will never again feel the particular, irreplaceable warmth of being truly close to another human being. And somewhere deep inside, you already know that warmth is worth more than the safety you traded it for. Think about this for a moment. Every person you have ever cut off was at some point someone who mattered to you enough to let in. That matters. It means you are not incapable of connection. It means the opposite. It means you feel things so intensely that when they go wrong, the only way you know how to survive is to remove the source entirely. That is not coldness. That is an overwhelmed nervous system doing the only thing it knows how to do to protect itself. But protection and healing are not the same thing. Protection stops the bleeding. Healing rebuilds the tissue underneath. The truth is much simpler than you think, even though it doesn't feel simple when you're in the middle of it. The truth is this. You were never meant to carry every wound alone. Somewhere along the way, you were taught, directly or indirectly, that needing people is a liability, that asking for support is weakness, that the safest man is the self-sufficient one, the one who doesn't flinch, doesn't ask, doesn't need. But that belief, as protective as it feels, is quietly costing you the very thing you're trying to preserve, your capacity to be loved fully and to love fully in return. I want you to think about your own life for a moment. Think about the people you've distanced yourself from over the years. Not to feel guilty, guilt rarely leads anywhere good, but to notice the pattern. Was there a common thread, a moment where you felt unseen, unheard, disrespected, or unsafe? And in that moment, did you speak up or did you quietly file it away, deciding that this was just more evidence that people eventually always let you down? Most men never ask themselves this question because asking it requires admitting something uncomfortable. That some of the distance we create isn't about the other person at all. It's about protecting a part of ourselves that never got the chance to heal from something much older than the current relationship. This is the part of the conversation where most people get uncomfortable, and I want to gently walk through it with you anyway. Because avoiding it doesn't make it less true. Many of the men who find themselves cutting people off again and again throughout their lives are not doing so because the people around them are consistently terrible. They are doing so because there is an old wound, often from childhood, often from a place of not feeling prioritized, not feeling protected, not feeling truly seen by the people who were supposed to love them unconditionally. And that wound is still running the show. Every new disappointment, even a small one, lands directly on top of that old bruise. And because the bruise is so tender, even a light touch feels unbearable. So the response isn't proportional to the current situation. It's proportional to everything that came before it. This doesn't mean your reasons for cutting people off weren't valid. Sometimes they absolutely were. Some people genuinely are toxic, draining, disrespectful, and walking away from them is not avoidance, it's wisdom. But there is a difference between walking away from a specific person for specific reasons and developing a pattern where every relationship eventually gets sacrificed on the altar of self-protection. One is discernment. The other is a wound wearing the costume of discernment. So how do you tell the difference? This is where it gets important and where real change begins to take root. You ask yourself honestly, without judgment, is this decision coming from clarity or is it coming from fear? Clarity feels calm even when it's sad. Fear feels urgent even when it's quiet. Clarity says this relationship no longer serves either of us and I can release it with peace. Fear says I need to get out before I get hurt again, even when the person in front of you hasn't actually done anything to justify the exit. Learning to sit in that space, learning to pause before the wall goes up automatically is one of the most powerful things a man can do for his own long-term well-being. And here is something most people never realize until much later in life. The goal was never to become a man who needs no one. That version of strength is a myth, and a lonely one at that. The goal is to become a man who can need people and still remain whole even when they disappoint him. A man who can be hurt without being shattered. A man who can say, "That hurt me," instead of simply disappearing. This kind of strength is quieter than the strength of self-sufficiency, but it is far more durable because it doesn't require you to keep the world at arm's length in order to feel safe. Let's slow down here for a moment because this next part matters more than almost anything else I'll say. Healing this pattern doesn't happen by forcing yourself to trust people who haven't earned it, and it doesn't happen by feeling ashamed of every wall you've ever built. Shame just adds another layer of pain on top of an already tender place. Instead, healing begins with something much gentler: awareness without judgment. It begins with noticing in real time the moment your body wants to retreat, and asking it, almost like you would ask a frightened child, "What are you afraid will happen if we stay?" Sometimes the answer is old. Sometimes it belongs to a version of you from 15, 20 years ago who is still bracing for an impact that isn't coming from the person in front of you today. This is where life begins to change, not in some dramatic breakthrough, but in these small, quiet moments of self-inquiry, repeated over and over until they slowly rewire the pattern that used to run on autopilot. It changes when you start responding to people from the present instead of reacting from the past. It changes when you allow yourself to say, out loud or even just internally, "I am scared to let you in, and I am choosing to try anyway." That sentence, simple as it sounds, is one of the bravest things a man can say, because it requires setting down the armor that has kept him standing for years. I know this isn't easy. I know that for many of you listening, the idea of staying instead of leaving, of communicating instead of disappearing, feels almost physically uncomfortable, like asking your body to do something it was never trained to do. That discomfort is real, and it deserves respect, not judgment. But growth rarely feels comfortable in the beginning. The first time you choose vulnerability over withdrawal, it will feel like stepping off a ledge, and that's okay. That feeling doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It means you're doing something your nervous system has never practiced before, and like anything unfamiliar, it takes repetition before it starts to feel like strength instead of danger. Here is something worth remembering on the days when old patterns try to pull you back into the silence. Every person who has ever built a genuinely deep, lasting connection with another human being has had to survive moments of disappointment, misunderstanding, and hurt along the way. There is no version of closeness that exists without risk. The people who seem to have peaceful, steady relationships are not people who never get hurt. They are people who learned how to repair instead of retreat, how to say, "This bothered me," instead of building a wall in silence, how to stay in the room during discomfort instead of leaving the moment things get hard. This is not a talent some people are born with. It is a skill, built slowly, one honest conversation at a time. And maybe this is the deepest truth underneath everything we've talked about today. You were never actually trying to become someone who doesn't need anyone. You were trying to become someone who could never be hurt again. But those two things are not the same, and chasing the second one cost you access to the first, because the very thing that makes you capable of deep love is the same thing that makes you capable of deep pain. You cannot numb one without numbing the other. The armor that protects your heart from being broken also prevents it from being fully alive. So here's where I want to leave you gently but honestly. If you have spent years cutting people off, protecting yourself by disappearing before you could be disappointed, I want you to know that this doesn't make you broken. It makes you someone who learned at some point that self-protection was the only tool available. But tools can be replaced with better ones. You are not required to keep using a strategy just because it once kept you alive. You are allowed to grow into someone who can stay, someone who can say the hard thing instead of walking away from it, someone who can let people see the parts of you that feel too tender to expose, and trust that not everyone will handle them carelessly. The life lesson underneath all of this is simple. Even if living it is not. Walls don't make you strong, they make you safe, and those are not the same thing. Real strength is not the absence of vulnerability. Real strength is choosing connection even after you've been hurt by it, because you understand that isolation was never actually protecting you. It was just postponing the pain and quietly costing you the very thing you were trying to preserve, which is a life full of people who truly know you. If any part of this reached something in you today, I want you to do something small right now before the feeling fades. Think of one person you've distanced yourself from, not for a dramatic apology, not for a grand reunion, but simply as an honest exercise. Ask yourself whether that distance is coming from clarity or from fear. And if it's fear, consider this your quiet permission to reach out, even just a little, not because every relationship deserves to be rebuilt, but because you deserve the chance to find out which ones do. You were not made to carry your life behind walls. You were made to be known fully by the people who are willing to stay. And it starts today with one honest step back toward connection, instead of one more step away from it.